You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Christopher Media, let's make some noise.
For Bill Whitney,
I've never been paranoid.
fear plays a large part in family life.
I feel like something's gonna happen. And if I scratch the surface, there'll be something terrible underneath.
He's afraid his sister
Could you zip me up, Billy?
is not what she seems.
God, Bill, what's the matter with you?
He thinks his friends are out to get him.
You make waves, Whitney, you're gonna drown.
People are what they are. Now you have to learn to accept that.
He's about to find out the truth.
Why are you guys doing this to me, huh?
What, you've been living with these people all your life and you didn't know anything about this?
Is far worse than he could ever imagine.
If you don't follow the rules, Billy, bad things happen.
Didn't you know, Billy boy? The rich have always sucked off low-class scum like you.
Uh-oh, Billy.
Clarissa? Don't be so intense. Now, some people make the rules, and some people follow the rules. It's a question of what you're born to.
You never were one of us.
You know, you really deserve what's going to happen to you. I don't think so. Wait. Can't you see they're setting you up for something? You know how I hate to give you drugs. You're officially dead.
Don't go home, Billy.
No.
Bill Whitney is about to become one
Showtime, Billy!
with society.
Who are you?
Let me give you a hand, Bill.
In Beverly Hills, what you fear is only the beginning.
Anything for society.
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Mr. J. Bauman.
Cream, sugar, or do you want me to pee in it?
Also back in the booth is Mr. Terry Frost.
I drink mine black, mate.
This week we are looking at the 1989 film from director Brian Yuzna, Society. The film stars Billy Warlock as Bill Whitney, a suburban teen who feels that things are amiss in his life. I'm keeping the description very brief as we're going to be spoiling things almost right off the bat, so go no further if you haven't seen Society before. Jay, when was the first time you saw Society, and what did you think?
I saw it for the first time when I was 11 or 12. It was on cable one night. I think I missed the very beginning, so I wasn't even sure what it was. I'd already seen the movie Parents, the Bob Balaban movie, and I was getting Parents vibes from it. That kind of paranoia and sort of isolation from your own family. And then it got to the moment where it goes into the bathroom when the sister is showering and like her upper torso is backwards. And I think I lost my mind. And then, the movie continues and it gets weirder. And by the time it got to the end with all the Play-Doh people, like at that point I was really into like makeup effects and creature effects. So I think I was too fascinated by like how creative and inventive the effects were to really sink in just how fucked up it all was, and that I probably shouldn't be watching it at 11 years old. But I mean, I was just fascinated by it, and then it was like impossible to find. Years after that, I would be telling people about this crazy movie, but I just like I think there might have been like a small DVD release, but up until the recent Arrow Blu-ray, it was just impossible to get a hold of. So I'd be telling people about this movie, and I wasn't able to show it. But now, thankfully, it's much more readily available. But I've always loved it. It's kind of clunky, and it has problems, like especially in the middle. There's some pacing issues, but it definitely makes up for it with the ending.
It's a very sinister film with a very innocuous title. How about you, Terry?
I first saw it on VHS back in the day when you used to go to places to actually get movies rather than have them come to you. So one of the things Australian video companies did was they tried to get things that were fairly low cost to buy. And so they'd pick up all of the Yuzna stuff. They'd pick up Reanimator, and anything that had a really weird cover would sell in a video store. So I picked up Society because of that cover with the masks and the stretchy skin on them, and watched it. And I'd already seen Reanimator at that time, so I was pretty much prepared for over the top and really comical visual effects. And so I just went into it. I'd already been prepositioned, being a working class boy, to know that rich people are bastards. I kind of ran with it and I went, yeah, this is cool. And it's got a gross out ending. It starts out a bit 90210 meets some other weird movie. And then suddenly it goes totally off the rails and goes into this Salvador Dali thing that Screaming Mad George did with the special effects. And I loved it.
I saw this one for the first time, probably only about a year ago. I got that Arrow Blu-ray that came out, and I had heard about this one. I'd seen that cover art for the longest time. For whatever reason, I just never checked it out and was completely blown away by the release and was really, really excited to finally be able to see this movie. Yeah, I can see why this has such a long history and is such a favored film by so many people. It is a delightful little film, and it just gets better every time that I watch it. I see more and more of the cleverness of the writing of it as as I see this multiple times. I mean, it's not like like a puzzle film or something where, every time I'm uncovering a new layer, but it's really nice to be able to put these pieces together a little bit more every single time that I see it. And I really did get that 90210 vibe as well when I was first starting to watch this. And at first I was like, where are we going with this? I'm not exactly sure, because the acting could be a little bit better. Some of the line delivery, some of the lines themselves. But I think that kind of clunkiness actually works in this movie's favor, because it feels like we're dealing with more with symbols than we actually are with people and with characters.
I always felt like the acting was deliberate. It's just heightened, like just a tiny bit, where everything feels completely phony, which certainly ties in with, nothing being what it seems. And you had mentioned like 90210. It always kind of reminded me of like a soap opera, and that includes the acting. It just heightened just a tiny bit where it's not realistic.
Yeah, Billy Warlock, who stars in the movie, came out of Baywatch, which was another one of those shows not known for its acting. And I really kind of had the nostalgia thing when I was watching this, because half the guys have mullets and half of the women are dressed in like parachute cloth. So it's that 1980s thing where women's clothing and women's fashion was really, really atrocious. And you can immediately spot a movie from the 1980s because of how atrocious the hair and dresses are in it. And this movie definitely delivers that. Lots of large hair. And puffy shoulders and really weird kind of textiles used to make the clothing with, yeah.
Well, the higher the hair, the closer to God. I love that Billy Warlock's name is stranger than his actual character name. And I'm going to keep calling him Billy through this, even though I think it's Bill in the film, just because he feels like a Billy as you're watching this movie.
Oh, Billy.
I guess he's supposed to be really super cool, right? Because he plays basketball. He is one of two candidates up for like president of the class or whatever. And it seems like everything is kind of going right for him at the beginning. Like he's got a cheerleader girlfriend, right? He's living the American dream. But by the end, he gets it all stripped away from him.
He wasn't born into the society. That's the interesting thing. And his character maybe is a little underwritten, but that idea that, he can, have all these advantages. He can be a part of this family, but he wasn't born into it. So he will never really be a part of that world.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, talking about that, his father in real life was a stuntman called Dick Warlock, which is either his name or a job description. It's pretty obvious right from the start that Billy isn't part of the family. Everybody else is blonde and kind of Aryan looking, and he's kind of dark and slightly swarthy looking. So it's pretty obvious right from the get-go that he was adopted in some way. And I'm just wondering how rich people would have adopted him. Did they select him like a supermarket chicken, or there's a backstory there that'd be kind of interesting to look at?
Well, and everybody is taller than him as well. I mean, even his sister towers over him.
That was Hasselhoff's fault with the Baywatch thing. All the other actors in Baywatch seem to be a lot shorter than David Hasselhoff. And Billy Warlock's definitely not a tall guy.
We know that we're in surrealist territory right from the beginning. I mean, this movie opens with the dream sequence. Then we're very early on, we're into a psychiatrist's office where we get Billy hallucinating these worms that are inside this apple. This is a movie that kind of wears its metaphors on its sleeve. I mean, this whole idea of the all-American apple being rotten to the core with all these worms. It kind of reminds me of like the opening of Blue Velvet when we dive under the plush lawn that Jeffrey's father is watering and go down into that insect world. And here we are pretty much diving into that right off the bat in this film and seeing that things aren't necessarily what they seem, but it also is a nice way to tell us maybe Billy isn't all there either, because he quickly shakes off that idea of all the worms inside the apple. So it's giving us a nice bit of doubt. I don't know if they play with this as much as maybe they should, but they give us a little bit of doubt here. Is he seeing what he's actually seeing? And we get that a few more times throughout this film so that we doubt whether he is a reliable protagonist or not.
That's all you need is a couple little moments like that just scattered throughout to really kind of sell that. But I was going to mention Blue Velvet too, that opening, because much like the opening of Blue Velvet, like it's not subtle. There's nothing subtle about the satire of this, but the rest of the movie is so kind of surreal and absurd that it actually works without feeling. It's not subtle, but it also doesn't feel heavy-handed just because the whole movie feels slightly unrealistic.
Character release is a bit weird because we see Billy being kind of really heavy and emotionally torn by these nightmares and by his psychiatrist visit. And the next thing, he's shooting hoops with his friend, totally fine, totally trying to be charming and fun. And that emotional transition from one scene to the next really doesn't work.
Billy's friend Milo, who we get introduced in this basketball scene here, I have a problem with Milo just that he's not in the movie enough. It feels like he's here in this scene and then he disappears for a long damn time until he finally shows up again. And it's like, oh yeah, remember me? I'm from that basketball scene in the beginning. And I was like, oh, who is this guy again? And then it's unfortunate because you were talking about the mullets, and both of these guys have mullets. So there's a couple times where I actually think that Milo is Billy and Billy is Milo. And I don't think that that is necessarily on purpose. Like, I don't think that they're supposed to be like, you know, doubles of each other or something. Because there was one part, sorry, and I'm jumping way ahead, where Milo is sitting in a vehicle and he's looking at Billy by a house, and then they cut back, and I was just like, well, that was a weird transition. How did he get from that Jeep all the way to the house so quickly and then back in the Jeep? And then I realized, oh, these are two different people. Okay.
I'm sure it wasn't intentional as far as the casting goes, but it's just all they had to work with in the late 80s. They'd all just looked like that.
We're all just going to wear our sport coats over like a T-shirt or whatever.
The skinny jeans with basketball boots, yeah.
I do like the line in there where Milo is telling Billy what a perfect guy that he is and that he'll probably end up assassinating the president, which was a nice line in 1989.
It's a very nice line now, yeah.
And yeah, we're quickly introduced into the family and get to see, you know, you're talking about how they're all blonde and very perfect for what 1989 was, and getting the early, almost as soon as we get the sister, we're getting like incest vibes from this. I mean, when she's asking Billy to zip her up, I mean, that's almost always like the husband's job to zip up the wife, right? And here we go, you know, hey, Billy, zip me up. And seeing that close-up of her skin and just how sweaty it looks, and then that bulge that comes out. Again, it's one of those like, did we just see that? Did Billy just see that? Or is that just in his imagination?
Yeah, they probably could have pushed that even further with some of the imagery. Like, I like that there's not too much of it, but it's almost like that moment specifically, like I when I first, like I mentioned, I don't think I saw the very beginning of the movie the first time I saw it. I think I missed that. So the first kind of really bizarre image that I saw was the bathroom scene where her upper torso is backwards. And so it's like the movie kind of lulls you in up until then, and it just feels like sort of a normal film. And then that happens. So it could have used, maybe a little bit more early on.
Yeah, bathroom scenes are a kind of mainstay of 1980s movies. If you have any movie set in a house, sooner or later a young woman is going to have a shower. It's one of those tropes that was really there, but they used it nicely to kind of start the foreshadowing that things aren't wrong, even though over the titles of the movie you do see some of the shunting, and we'll probably get to the shunting a little bit later, but they do foreshadow that in the title sequence. We don't know what's going on, particularly at that stage. There's some kind of weird people having an orgy or something, but later on we kind of backfill our knowledge of that and go, yep, that's the shunting.
Yeah, and that shower scene helps sell the incest stuff too, where it's just like, because if it all is in his mind, then he's just like creepily leering at his sister, and her reaction to it feels so genuine too. When she's like, "Get out of here!" Like she's hiding what's really happening, pretty well.
It's an Animal House moment, yeah.
That camera is just lingering on her so long. It's just like, no, get out, stop looking at me, stop. Just like, how long is she going to stand there while the audience can ogle her? Well, she's just like, no, quit it, really, stop.
Why doesn't she shut the door?
She's too busy covering herself because she didn't want to do actual nudity in the film.
Unlike Billy's eventual girlfriend, Clarissa, but we'll definitely get to her. They go back and forth between family and psychiatrist's office quite a bit here, and if we haven't already realized that there's an incest theme to this, I mean, he comes right out and just says like, oh yeah, just a little incest and psychosis, don't worry about it. It's like, okay, maybe something that the psychiatrist is going to pick up on.
Incest and psychosis, that's a great name for an edgy nightclub.
This whole idea of the coming out party, now I didn't necessarily get this, that had the coming out party happened already, because we're going to get like what I thought was the tape recording of the coming out party, or is that them just talking about the coming out party?
No, that's the coming out party, because they're saying that Billy, it's a little clunky, but they're saying for whatever reason Billy Warlock couldn't attend it or something like that. So the coming out party is just a giant orgy that Billy wasn't at.
Poor Billy misses out on all the fun.
And we get to see what a great debater he is. He's almost a master debater here at Beverly Hills Academy. Yeah, sorry, I had to go there. Debating against Marty, who is offset from everybody else in this entire movie by wearing glasses. And I thought that this would come up at some point, of him wearing glasses, and maybe he wasn't part of the society too, because he seems to be the only person other than Billy who isn't quote unquote perfect. He's got this mark to him of his glasses. So I thought, oh, okay, yeah, he's going to be an outsider as well. But that never really comes to fore. But it's interesting. He just kind of like loves to fuck around with Billy, apparently.
Well, they hint at him at one point, possibly helping Billy. But then it turns out that, yeah, he's also a part of the society. So it's just kind of messing with the expectations a bit.
One of the other interesting things is that beach scene that we get there, where he has a breakup with his girlfriend, who's monstrous anyway. She's kind of a social climbing, nasty piece of work. And then we get Clarissa basically bukkakeing Billy with the suntan lotion.
Just weird sexual imagery at any possible moment in a Brian Yuzna film.
Absolutely. And then they cut to the large woman that doesn't seem to talk, with all the zinc oxide on her face. We later find out she's Clarissa's mother, but she comes in from left field with no introduction, and we kind of go, well, who the hell is this?
That's not Divine. That's her name.
And the introduction of David Blanchard is great. The way that it seems like he's going to kill Billy's sister at first, because he's hiding in the closet, and then he comes bursting out, running down the stairs and out into, the rest of the world. And this whole thing of like, is he just a absolute creep, or is he, the master of information, or who is this guy? And I always find it hard to believe that he was dating Billy's sister, because he just seems like the schlubbiest guy in the entire cast. Like, no offense to Tim Bartel or anything, but he just really plays a good schlub in this.
Well, he did come out of the closet.
Yes.
Yeah, well, he does, because that's the opening of the film. Like, I mean, much like what kind of happens with Bill, is that if all this stuff is in his mind, then he's the crazy person. And at the beginning, yeah, with what's his name, the mole guy?
Oh, you mean the beauty mark, David Blanchard?
Yeah. David Blanchard, yeah, but like with his character hiding in the closet, like he comes across like a creep, even though, as we discover, he has the best of intentions.
Yeah, he's also got that license plate on his car that says ears. Whereas Billy's Jeep has hoops because he likes playing basketball.
He is the auditory spy. Even though he's there in the closet, I would think spying on Jenny, it turns out that he has been bugging her earring, and that's how he ends up getting this tape of the coming out party and all the fun times that were had there. And that he's finally the guy who kind of confirms Billy's, well, he doesn't confirm Billy's suspicions. He basically blows the lid off of all this stuff and tells Billy, like, hey, all of these things were going on, and, plays this tape for him. He's the only other person who seems to know what's really happening, and then he's quickly dispatched, and then the tape is proved, quote unquote, to be a phony. We get to hear the, quote unquote, again, real tape, courtesy of the psychiatrist.
Yeah, and that earring microphone has really, really great audio quality.
Hell yes.
It's very clear.
Yeah, you could use it for podcasting, yeah.
I would love, yeah. I wish I could get my ear pierced with that right now.
Yeah, that'd work. You could kind of podcast on the hop just walking down the street.
I have always wondered about that, though. The tape that has the massive orgy on it, but then when he goes back and replays it, it's normal. But I've always been curious, like, did the family go back and re-record that to make him feel like he's going insane or throw him off the track? It's never really clear.
It kind of reminds me of the tape from The Exorcist, where, like, you play it and it sounds normal, and then you play it backwards and it's all this other stuff that's actually on there. But, yeah, I don't know. Maybe he just played it backwards and then it was just a normal, hey, honey, get in the car kind of thing.
Well, maybe the family kind of got together literally and did the recording. It would have been nice to kind of somewhere later in the film have a bit of a flashback to them recording the other part of the tape while they're in the situation they are when Billy finds out what they really are.
It's one of those nice, to me, unexplained things. Kind of like that weird doll that Billy keeps finding in his car. It's like a Ken doll with a screw through its head. I'm not sure what this is supposed to signify, but it's threatening nevertheless.
It's Milo messing with him, as we find out, because later he has the blow-up doll with the Ken doll in the blow-up doll's mouth, although I'm not really sure what Milo's trying to accomplish. It's a very bizarre prank that doesn't have any payoff. It's just him. I mean, it's just, I don't know. Maybe it's just they thought the imagery would be interesting.
Maybe Milo's into Billy and doesn't really know how to express that.
Hey, that works. There's
a lot of gay themes in this movie, and a lot of... I can't even say this word anymore without it thinking of Zizek. There's a lot of the anus in this film. Our two main females, because I don't really count Shauna as our main female, because I wasn't even sure she was the same person when she showed back up to break up with Billy, because it just doesn't pay off. Or when she goes to the beach, I should say. That doesn't pay off to me from like her being the cheerleader. The two women, Jenny and Clarissa, both of them have their bodies twisted around at some point. So it's like their sex organs are backwards, So now it's the butt in the front and the vagina in the back. And then that we have these two, jumping forward, these two penetration scenes of men where they're basically being fisted. I mean, there's a lot of anus stuff in this, and I guess that goes along with like the history of surrealism, right?
Two men get fisted in the course of like 10 minutes from each other, maybe less.
I've only seen two other movies where that happened.
Did Gaspar Noé direct one of them?
No, I was thinking somebody showed me a gay porn once, but that's another story. Yeah.
The anal birth of Bert?
Something about puppetry. Yeah.
Well, not to mention that the dad, his head is literally his anus at one point.
And then the way that the sister's head comes down from between the mother's legs. I mean, that is one of the great visuals of this film. And we'll definitely talk about all the amazing visuals as we go forward.
It's what sells the movie.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that picture of the dad as the literal butthead, I mean, that's what got me. The first time I saw that image, I was just like, what the hell movie is this from? I need to find this.
Yeah, it's very kind of goatsy, really, isn't it?
I guess it's more alien-ness of the society as opposed to literal aliens. And they make this big deal about, are they aliens or are they not aliens? And, they very specifically say we're not aliens, but we get the little kids shooting before Billy gets bukkakied. I guess he gets bukkakied twice because he also gets the little kids doing that to him and screaming, "Die, alien scum."
They do that to his girlfriend.
Oh, that's right. Who actually is a member of the society. Okay. Oh, so the from the mouth of babes, I suppose.
But yeah, they do say "Die, alien scum," and I think that's very deliberate.
Those kids are a little bit like the Frog Brothers in what's the name? What that movie? Lost Boys.
Maybe this is their early beginnings, and then they move up the coast
Yeah, the Frog Brothers, the early years.
This is the prequel. That'd be fantastic. That's a franchise I could get behind. The Lives of the Frog Brothers.
And then you have the next movie where they're middle-aged and trying to shoot kind of MILF vampires or something.
Didn't they do that? Wasn't there one of the direct-to-video sequels to The Lost Boys where the Frog Brothers came back and it was just depressing?
Yeah, I seem to remember something about it, yeah.
It seems like Corey Feldman would not let that opportunity pass him by.
Do you want a party?
There's a Nightcrawler who's created a new designer drug. The only problem is it's not a drug. It's vampire blood. He's breeding an undead army. The only thing that stands between him and the annihilation of the entire human race would be us, the Frog Brothers.
We haven't been the Frog Brothers for a long time.
I can't do it without you.
Eventually, we are introduced to Judge Carter, who is like the authority figure in this movie. And again, I think that we should have had a little bit more of Judge Carter because he's just kind of like here along with the family at one point. And I really think that he should have had more to do and actually shown that he had a little bit of power, but he just seems like, I guess it's fitting. He's more the shadowy character behind the scenes, but we don't necessarily ever see him doing much in this movie.
Did we just see him in that one scene and then not again until the end? I'm trying to remember. I think that's
yeah,
it. Yeah,
I think so. Yeah. He doesn't really have the gravitas for the role in a sense. I think that the judge should have been a bit more powerful and menacing figure, and not just somebody chomping a wet cigar all the time.
Yeah, he should have like channeled more like Joe Don Baker from Joysticks or something. Like had that gravitas to him.
Yeah, or even Charlie Varick for that matter. That would have been fun.
Did you say Joysticks had gravitas? Just making sure that I heard that right.
I'm not sure we all agree on that one.
Yeah, I didn't realize at first that Blanchard has that ear license plate, which is very appropriate for his character. And him, oh my God, the Billy there and with he's like standing amongst the wreckage of Blanchard's car, and it just feels like he's literally just walking right into the middle of a crime scene. And this is the introduction of a police character. And see, I thought the police character would pay off and take him in front of the judge, and then we would get, again, some of that stuff and maybe get a little bit more stakes as far as like something Billy wants or some sort of threat to him that's outside of the family. And there's really nothing, like there's the debate stuff, the class stuff, and then the girlfriend stuff, but we're quickly pulling those away, and there's nothing else there for him to really hold on to. I mean, there's just basketball, so maybe if there was like a basketball tournament or something that meant something to him, but that's the one thing that he manages to hold on to. So even if we had like a third act big basketball thing where he turns into a werewolf or something, then maybe I could see that. But
yeah, they do have that body horror bit with Blanchard's funeral where he touches his cheek and the cheek kind of collapses in, and they think that it's a reconstruction work after the car accident. That's kind of a nice little note there to keep the horror going during that bit where it's mostly investigation into what's going on.
That's right around the reintroduction of Milo, because like I said, he's been kind of missing in this. And he also shows up at, what is it, Ted the Tycoon Ferguson's party? Because there's the whole thing at the beach where Shauna wants Billy to get an invite for this big party that's coming up. And then that absolutely bizarre, he gets a letter in the mail from Ted inviting him to it. He says, yeah, I'll send you a telegram. And then he actually does. It's like, what? So that was surprising, but pleasantly so.
Well, now everyone would just get text messages, so it's a little more cinematic.
Yeah, well, that's always been my problem with Death Proof is the long scenes of reading text messages over orchestrated music. But yeah, a lot of things come together in that party scene. We get again Clarissa showing up. We've got Milo showing up. We're getting more of a relationship between Clarissa and Billy. And I had to say, Clarissa, even though this is late 80s, she's really got it going on in this movie. And she was always very nice to see on screen.
I think she was like a Playboy playmate or something before this. I know this was her first movie.
Yeah, she was. There's some extras on the Arrow disc where they interview her, and basically she says, yeah, I did Playboy and then I did some nude modeling, but I'd never done kind of video nudity before this movie, and she felt very awkward about doing that. Devin DeVasquez is her name. So this was her first kind of sex scene, though if you do a quick video search, you can see that it wasn't her last.
That awkwardness that she has on screen that we talked about, as far as the actors go, that actually plays in her favor. Like, I don't know, she might have blossomed into a terrific actress, but in this one, she's a little bit rough around the edges, and I think that works in her favor for this film.
Everybody just seems so off, like her especially, but that party scene where he kind of gets to know her better is a little weird, because it's like he just immediately decides to start cheating on his girlfriends with her, and it kind of comes out of nowhere. It's just all of a sudden he's just
wasn't there a scene at the school though where where his girlfriend kind of broke up with him?
Was there? I might be forgetting that.
Yeah, there was just a brief thing. The acting was so bad, it's easy to forget that. But
hey, that's Heidi Kozak from Friday the 13th, Part 7.
Yeah, well,
give her due.
But yeah, the best bit in that sex scene though is Billy Warlock's O-face. It's hilarious. It kind of, even if your O-face is really like that, you probably shouldn't use it in a movie, but he does.
Well, it has a moment where it's like, oh, I guess he's done. It's very, pardon the pun, anticlimactic.
Yes. Well, as we find out later in the movie, everybody who's part of society is actually a great big jelly blob full of worms. So maybe his dick hit the worms.
Well, for sure, he freaks out when her other hand comes out from the wrong angle and starts stroking his face. So I don't know if he necessarily finished or not, but he's out of the bed as soon as that happens, and then gets to see her all twisted around, which again, it's an easy effect to do with just having two women, laying in bed that way, but it pays off very well.
It's such a simple effect, but it's so effective.
Yeah, it sells the strangeness really well.
The revelation that big, quiet woman at the beach who was very intimidating to Billy, not only, because Billy Warlock is so short and this woman seems to be pretty tall, but that she's just there looming and menacing, that she ends up being Clarissa's mom is pretty awesome. And it's like every time we see her, she's got different hairstyle. And then it took me a long time to realize that she's got some sort of weird hair thing where she seems to eat people's hair, and she spits out this, I guess it's a hairball. Is the earring inside of the hairball?
I think it's just a hairball. If you look at the beginning of that scene where she comes in and kind of interrupts them while they're in the living room, and there's like a wider shot of her, and she's just holding a clump of blonde hair. So I think she just kind of like snacks on it, I guess. I got the impression that because I guess she's a part of the society. She's Clarissa's mom, but I don't know, because like there's so much incestuous stuff going on. I wonder if she's like the product of inbreeding, and that's why she is the way she is. It's never really explained. It's just one of those sort of odd things that they put in the movie.
I have a theory about Clarissa's mum. Everybody else is into the orgy scenes and all that kind of thing. She does it solo, and that's why she keeps spitting out hair. She's eaten somebody and spat out the hair. And she's kind of shunned from society because she doesn't get involved in all the fun.
Well, it's weird, too, because she's not really involved with the orgy, and then Clarissa's not involved with the orgy. Like, she stays clear of that whole thing, and it doesn't seem right that she falls in love with Billy, it seems like, and then she doesn't want anything to do with the shunting at the end. She just is like, oh, Billy, I'm going to save you. And it doesn't necessarily fit with the rest of society, so I guess she would be kind of an outcast from them.
Yeah, it's a pretty standard trope to have the potential villainous character kind of come around to falling for our hero, and then her giving up her evil ways or her the environment she's grown up on. But it's the characters are kind of underwritten, so it does sort of come out of nowhere.
That's the James Bond fucks the bad girl trope.
Yes.
Yeah, and the bad girl turns around and then gets shot by the bad guys.
That's the official name for it, that entire long stretch that you just said.
It's a work in progress. I'll get there. I'll bring it down to about 4 words at some stage. Yeah.
Fucks the bad out of her?
Or fucks the good into her, one or
the other, yeah. We talked about Blanchard getting his face poked by Milo earlier. that church scene is really strange because it looks like a church, but then there's a big Star David on the wall. So I was like, what are we saying here? Are we in a temple rather than a church? But then that doesn't necessarily make sense because I don't think that he would be embalmed like that and laying out if he was in a temple.
I think they just filmed wherever they were allowed to film.
Okay. Sorry. I'm thinking way too much. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
there's certain details of the movie that are planned out, but I don't know if that was one.
Yeah, we can't really go into that too deeply because I'm starting to think the whole movie's anti-Semitic.
Well, that's like what happened to John Carpenter when people were trying to come out and say that They Live was anti-Semitic, which this is a movie I would compare to They Live in certain aspects.
Yeah. They Live always struck me as just like an anti-wrestler movie.
I would say with that scene in the alleyway, it's a pro wrestling movie.
Well, yeah. I mean, though Keith David wasn't a wrestler and he kind of gives as good as he gets.
I thought we were still talking about Society and I got horribly confused.
Oh, wow. Yeah, sorry. No wrestling in Society.
I think a good Roddy Piper scene would have sparked up this movie really well.
If he just like came running in and like body slam Marty or something.
I'm just going to say Society is an anti-wrestling movie because there's no wrestling in it.
There you go. It's very pro basketball, though. We were talking about Milo and the whole blow-up doll thing. The whole shrunken head, apparently he did that to Billy as well. I mean, Milo's got just a weird sense of humor.
He's just the zany 80s supporting character. That's how they were. Do you remember that scene in Revenge of the Nerds where Booger stuffs shrunken heads into people's lockers?
I'm surprised Milo wasn't a horn dog and like just did that whole riff throughout the entire movie. You know, like, do you like Swedish films? Those kind of things.
Who doesn't?
Yeah, it feels like he should be that kind of trope, the sort of like the 80s boner comedy kind of, horn dog character. But he's not. He's just odd. Everything in the movie is just slightly off.
He's kind of not necessary to anything that goes on in the movie for the most part of it, really. He's kind of slightly superfluous.
Until they need him to move the plot along.
Absolutely, yeah. He's just one of those levers they pull to get something somewhere.
So we talked about the way that Billy is stripped of everything throughout this film, and the last really remaining thing left for him is this whole class president stuff. So there's this very elaborate plot for Marty to suddenly befriend Billy, say, meet me out here at the canyon tonight. Billy shows up. Marty's had his throat slit, and then he goes and grabs the cops with Clarissa, comes back. It's a different car, yada, 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 goes to school the next day, and then announces that Marty's dead. And when Marty shows up, it's just like, oh, joke's on you, Gumshoe. Ha, ha, ha. And then that's like the end of his political career. So now he is stripped of everything. But like I said, it's very, very elaborate, the lengths that they go to humiliate him in front of the class.
Yeah, it's a really good job of gaslighting, really. He's been gaslighted his whole life. And still he's tries to play kind of cute and charismatic in the Baywatch style.
He ends up in a hospital and, I know, he comes home and there's like an intervention waiting for him. And I think that might actually be where we maybe see the judge again. And I think the psychiatrist is definitely there. And so we kind of get the idea that the psychiatrist is in on it with the family. I mean, it would make sense if, the psychiatrist is leading this whole thing, right? And we get Billy being put into the hospital, and then it gets this whole series of audible flashbacks. And I thought for sure here he would put things together and suddenly realize what's going on. But instead he just kind of like wakes up and he's just like, hey, all my fears are real. I am free now. And so I thought maybe he would just leave town after that. But no, now he's on this path to collide with everything at the end of the film. Even when Clarissa tells him, like, don't go home, he still ends up having to go home and I guess face all of his fears and face his family.
Yeah, it seems like a silly choice for that kind of thing. If it was me, I'd just burn the house down and get the hell out of there. Yeah, a little bit of arson. Oops, sorry, something went wrong. And get the hell out. And then you have the great big shunting thing in flames. That would have been good, but the ending kind of lets it down after the gross out wonderfulness of those parts. But yeah, Billy makes bad life choices.
I think that's the message of the movie. Get out when you have the chance.
Yeah, they fuck you up. Your parents do. Yeah. I was going to say, did we get to the shunting now?
Now we have the glorious shunting scene.
Can we? That's you just have to get to the shunting. So the rest of the movie up until that is pretty clunky, and then the shunting more than makes up for it.
I mean, they knew that this, like Yuzna says in the extras, and I think he even says it in the interview that you'll hear later. They knew where they wanted to go, and they basically worked backwards from there. So this piece de resistance is where everything was leading this whole time, and they knew that where they were going to be. And this is a tour de force. This is the moment that people talk about with this movie, this whole third act shunting ritual scene, and it just keeps going, which is fantastic. And every time you think that we're done with what's happening, they go back to it, or they might turn it up a little bit more. They might move to another location and show something else. And it works so well.
Yeah, I mean, just the start of the shunting would be enough for most movies, and then it just keeps building and building on top of that. And the great thing is, like, I mean, there's a couple little hints early on, like when he sees the bump on his sister's back, or tiny moments like that indicate that there might be some sort of body horror, but nothing can prepare you for the shunting.
Yeah, they dial it up to 11, and there's so much methylcellulose goo used. They must have had like 44-gallon drums of that stuff just to pour over people. It's like the weirdest use of KY jelly in the world.
I was really reminded of the end of Terror Vision and how Garrett Graham's hot tub / pool just becomes this gelatinous mass, and I think that was all KY jelly. And yeah, this is very similar as far as like people basically melt into each other, and it just becomes this glorious mess of bodies twisting and reforming. And it's great that they do all this stuff with practical effects. I mean, it's very smart that he shoots this with this very intense red light to kind of, hide the edges a little bit, as it were. But it works really, really well because it also makes it into a much more horrific scene with that red light. And to see, I think the one visual image for me that always gets me is, I think it's the judge when he reaches and he grabs Blanchard's buttocks, because now we are reintroduced. Blanchard is not dead. Haha, he's actually alive, and he is one of 2 sacrificial lambs for the shunting. And he reaches down and grabs a buttock, and his fingers just slide right into that flesh. It's such a simple thing, but it just gets me every single time I see it, because it's so smooth the way that it happens.
It's goopy. That's the only word to describe it, as goopy. And yeah, that red lighting is like, because you see it happen in one of the shots. It just switches to that red lighting. There's no real justification for it, but it just adds so much to the atmosphere of that entire sequence.
Yeah, I think between the red lighting and the goo, it kind of hides the fact that all of that latex isn't really textured like human skin. And so it kind of gives it a reality that it might not have had otherwise, because you think, oh yeah, they're oozing this stuff out of their skin. And so their skin suddenly loses texture. And all of those wonderful Screaming Mad George special effects are enhanced by that lighting and the goo.
And we talked about Screaming Mad George way, way long ago on the projection booth when we did an episode on Freaked. And you can really see those freaked looks in this as well. Like that whole idea of like Ricky and the way that his face looks, or, the troll and these kind of things. You can see that kind of viscera also going on with this. And yeah, it's like you're talking about the oozing of stuff, and it's like sweat mixed with just snot or mucus. It just feels like every sort of fluid that a body can produce is suddenly on these people, and just the way that it is just dripping off of them. And this is where really, like, I kind of was slagging on the Judge Carter character earlier, but he comes to the fore in this whole sequence, and this is where he shines. I mean, this actor doesn't seem to have any fear when it comes to just going balls out with this, almost literally, but him in his stupid boxer shorts and stuff. and his cigar and his undershirt. I mean, it's just a perfect look for him as he's just enjoying this idea and the way that all of these people are falling upon Blanchard and then just starting to morph into him. Oh, it works so well.
Yeah, this is one place where people in society don't dress for dinner.
No.
I saw the extras with Screaming Mad George being interviewed, and he mentioned that he was really influenced for this movie by Salvador Dali's work. And you can definitely see that you've got that kind of elasticity of the skin and skin being repurposed and morphed and all that kind of thing. And I think it works really, really well. It's creatively, the way he kind of twists and turns and changes human bodies is genius.
Yeah, and it's so, I mean, it goes so far, and the visuals are so bizarre and surreal that it's not even, like, I can't even imagine trying to submit this movie to the MPAA because it's not gore. It's beyond. I think that was someone described a John Waters movie, a critic once, that it was beyond pornography. And it's like, that's kind of like this, where it's like, it's so its own thing, where it's like, how do you even, like, how do you rate this in comparison to other horror movies of that era?
Yeah,
nothing compares.
Maybe it's got its own genre, pus punk.
One of the shots that always gets me in John Carpenter's The Thing is when Blair puts his hand over Gary's mouth and his hand starts to become part of Gary's mouth. It's like his fingers go underneath Gary's skin. That's the part this is reminding me of. You know, it's just like the way that The Thing can turn into all of these, you know, different shapes and creatures and stuff. And I guess that whole thing with, like, I was talking about Screaming Mad George and the freaked effects, also that effect in The Thing, which I know is not Screaming Mad George, it's Rob Bottin, but that effect in The Thing where it looks like the person was half transformed before they burned him or froze him or whatever it was. And you get that idea in here as well, where we have these bodies shifting into each other. Insofar as, like, at one point, again, when you don't think you could go any farther, there's a literal pool where they just kind of unform and form back into themselves. And now the judge has Blanchard's beauty mark on his cheek. So it's like all of their cells commingled, and they're able to pull themselves back apart into what they were. And apparently, I guess it seems like they're using Blanchard for food or just for sport, or maybe a combination of both.
I think there's definitely a food aspect to it.
Yeah, they seem to plan for this, because that's the Billy Warlock's character is sort of, he's been kind of brought up with the intention of eventually using him for the shunting.
Yeah, it's kind of like a whole pig barbecue for these people.
Yes, it is exactly like a whole pig barbecue.
Yeah, just grab pieces off it and eat them. So that's basically, it's not the sort of party you want to be invited to, really, is it? So I do appreciate the kind of metaphor of rich people being spineless. They don't have any bones in them.
I didn't even think about that. I was just thinking of the very obvious metaphor of the rich literally eating the poor. That's, again, going to this movie not being subtle. Like, even with the judge, you mentioned that moment where he has the beauty mark on him now from eating the Blanchard character, which is like, that would have been a great little moment. But they had to spell it out by having him actually, I think he even says, like, oh, I have the beauty mark now, or something. Like, he really points it out. It would have been nice if it was a little more subtle.
I think if it was made now, though, what they'd do is he'd get a tattoo off Blanchard or something like that, rather than a beauty mark. So it'd be really cool if they remade this movie, and why not? If they had like a tattooed member of society who collected tattoos off the people they ate.
Only if it's all practical effects. Otherwise, there'd be no point.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. You've got to go.
They'd actually have to get tattooed?
All the shunting would have to be authentic.
It's a weird term, really, shunting. It's what you do to join trains together. It's a kind of an odd term to use, but it seems sort of semi-appropriate.
Is that that's what shunting is? Okay,
yeah,
I've never heard of it outside of the movie.
No, when you join up two train carriages and they will go clunk together and those things interlock. That's the only meaning of shunting, really. So basically I suppose you could argue the point that the human centipede shunts people together.
So you're saying that Solo, a Star Wars story, is actually a de-shunting story?
I'm not sure. I haven't seen that. I've got this real kind of ID fix that Star Wars is not worth my attention. I get such shit for that.
I don't know if you will anymore.
I won.
It's too many women. Too many women in that movie. My God. How can you do it? And again, when you don't think that things can even go farther, Billy manages to escape thanks to Clarissa, and kind of thanks to Clarissa's mom and to Milo, who show up as kind of the cavalry, though they're fairly ineffectual. And I'm surprised that Milo doesn't get eaten in this part. But Billy's being chased by the psychiatrist, and that weird turn when the psychiatrist's head turns into almost the devil horns. It's almost Rodney James Dio flashing the devil horns, and then his hand becomes that as well. And that's a great moment for me, is when the hand goes reaching out towards Billy. I mean, that is a very surrealistic moment for me. And that is what leads us into Billy's Oedipal nightmare, going into his parents' bedroom, where we've seen them before, mom, dad, and the sister, pretty much half dressed, hanging out in the bedroom. And then here they are, very indisposed, let's say. And God, some really, again, horrific images. I mean, the whole idea of the mom walking on her hands, and
I don't even think they're her hands, though. I think they look like man hands. So I think they're husband's hands. And then the daughter coming out of her vagina, as is known to happen.
You only usually do it once. I didn't really want to think about that one too hard at the time because I was worried I'd have nightmares about it. But it's brilliant. It's a brilliant use of the concept that they had for the movie, and just kind of having the three of them morph together and realizing that the orgies they were having were basically them merging together like spare bits of soap. It's a brilliant little moment there.
And then the movie ends in a fist fight, just like every good movie should end. Just like every movie should end. It ends in a fist fight.
Especially Solo, a Star Wars story, yeah.
I think it might end in a fist fight. What always got me was, I think it was Clear and Present Danger, one of the Jack Ryan movies, where it's like Jack Ryan is a really smart guy. He really outwits the bad guy at all times, but they end up having a fist fight on a boat. And I'm just like, dude, that guy's like 20 years younger than you. How are you winning? But he's Harrison Ford. He can do what he wants.
Well, no, this movie doesn't end with a fist fight. It ends with fistine. the second moment of fistine in the span of 10 minutes. Yeah. And that's the only moment, like as surreal and gross as all this stuff is, that's the only moment that feels like actual gore, where he pulls him inside out, and it's just disgusting.
Yeah, it's kind of like a visualization of, I'm going to shove my hand up your ass and pull your teeth out. And they actually do that.
Yeah.
Pop his eyes, turns him inside out, and then who was it that said that it looks like all these worms on the inside of them, or slugs? Ooh.
Yeah, he's all full of worms, which kind of ties in to the beginning when the apple full of worms. It's a little foreshadowing for that.
Oh, and the way that they're complimenting the gardener on all of his fresh crop of slugs, because you're like, oh, they're complimenting him on his roses or something, and then he's got all these slugs in his hand. Ugh.
And then at the shunting at the party, you see there's a waiter with a plate full of slugs, so that even that comes back.
Yeah, I like the idea of, if you want to go fishing and you don't have any bait, just rip a rich person inside out.
Just full of worms.
Absolutely. The big question here is Trump one of them?
I don't really have any doubt in my mind.
He looks like a screaming Mad George creation.
He does a bit, yeah. But the thing is Melania one of them, or does she like next week's full pig barbecue?
Have we ever seen this in a movie before? A character getting pulled inside out like that? Like even since then, I don't know if I've ever seen that visual before in anything.
I can't think of one.
No, I can't think of any either.
It's rare when you see something in a film that you could honestly say you've never, ever seen before.
I want to say I've seen in cartoons like a cat being pulled inside out, and then you get to see the cat skeleton around.
But he wasn't full of worms?
No, he wasn't full of
KY
worms.
jelly?
But yeah, that might be about it. And now I'm going to have to scan through 100 cartoons until I find that image or something. It seems like something that Max Fleischer would have done a long time ago.
Yeah, but I think it goes to show that they had a kind of audacity and a boldness to do that, and going places no one had gone before or possibly since. to just go, okay, we're going to show you what's inside. Here's how we're going to do it. Bam. And they just kind of reach up, pull it out through the eyeballs and turn the guy inside out.
Yeah, Brian Yuzna has done a lot of weird shit since then, but I don't think anything has come close to just the amount, the quantity of weird shit that's in this movie.
Well, it is such a wonderful way to end this film. Like I said, they pulled out all the stops because there's just like, we could have maybe gotten a little bit more at the beginning, a little bit more in the middle, but it's a train that's going until that shunting happens. And it is just, it will leave you with a lot of fond memories to take with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah. I mean, I once watched Dune, the David Lynch Dune, while on acid. And that was a good experience. This is the kind of movie that I would never watch on acid.
That's funny. One of the few times I've done acid, I watched Blue Velvet.
Oh, God, that sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah. How fucked up are you? Nah, Dune is interesting because we're trying to calculate in metric how long the sandworms were, and we came out like they were 15 miles long. It's totally inaccurate, but we couldn't do mathematics at that stage.
There have been documented sightings of worms as large as 450 meters in the deep desert.
I even forgot after I watched this the first time whether Billy gets away, because I don't really kind of care.
It almost doesn't matter. Because the movie just, once the shunting is over, they have him quickly run out with his friends, and then it just cuts to black. It's just like, okay, you got what you paid for. We're out.
I still think you should have set the house on fire. Even if it was like a really bad model, it would have been fun.
Clarissa is one of them, so the creatures are still around, I mean, but really, even though Billy escapes with Clarissa and Milo, society, the creatures, other than Turd Ferguson.
Turd Ferguson, it's a funny name.
They're all still there. Everybody's still fine. And they're all just going to continue on with their thing. Apparently, there have been sequels to this. There was a comic book sequel, and then there was a sequel movie written that hasn't been shot yet. And I don't know if I ever will be. But yeah, this leaves us wide open. There's a whole lot of messed up stuff that can still go on.
Well, they just kind of let him leave, too. Like, they're all just standing around and they watch him leave. It's like they're not terribly concerned about their cover being blown.
Maybe they were all going into a food coma.
They're just too tired.
Yeah, too much meat. You just kind of want to lie around on the couch and watch television.
I think a few years hence, Billy will be walking somewhere in San Francisco and see Milo and be like, Milo, it's you. You're okay. And then Milo points at him and just like a big slug comes out of his mouth.
The Invasion of the Body Snatchers ending, but but he's full of worms.
I think if they do the sequel, it should be like Society to the Trump presidency.
Oh, man, yeah, the satire you could do with this type of story now.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Well, I know back during the Bush administration, Stuart Gordon wanted to do another Reanimator movie with Reanimator in the White House, and it was going to be satirical of that, and that never came to be either. But it's him and Brian Yuzna have a connection.
With William H. Macy was supposed to play the president in that?
Yeah, I mean, it must have gone far enough along where they were, casting it. I don't know what happened to it. It's disappointing because now the last Reanimator we have is Brian Yuzna's Beyond Reanimator, which I don't know. I'm going to revisit it when the Blu-ray comes out because I haven't seen it in forever, but I remember being really disappointed.
Yeah, I would watch the shit out of a Reanimated movie with William H. Macy in it. That would be in my ballpark, definitely.
All right, we're going to take a break and play an interview with director Brian Yuzna, and we'll be back with that after these brief messages.
It's not easy having a good time, and it's not cheap either. Every week, the projection booth brings you a new show, possibly even two, focusing on all genres of cinema. If you've sat through the 7-hour Conan episode, the 6-hour Star Wars episode, or even the hour-long Superman episode, you know that Mike and his co-host put forth a lot of work into researching the movies, tracking down the interview subjects, and putting together one of the best podcasts on the internet. Now I'm asking you if you can repay all that hard work by giving back to the projection booth. The show has a Patreon fundraiser at Patreon. That's Patreon.com/amiss. patreon.com/projection booth. You can donate as little as $1 a month. That's $12 a year. At least 50 great shows and 2 terrible ones. That's the price of 2 matinee tickets. Now, isn't the projection booth worth it? Once again, that's patreon.com/projection booth. Donate today. It's the right thing to do.
Well, Eric, would you say that we're just two dudes who love talking about movies over at the Culture Cast?
I mean, yeah, I don't know if dudes is the correct nomenclature, though.
Dudes, bros. Okay, what about movie nerds?
No, okay, dudes is fine. Not nerds. Anything but movie nerds.
Well, over here at the Culture Cast, we talk about new movies, overlooked gems, classics, and some films that cause us to question our sanity twice a week.
Yeah, Hot to Trot comes to mind for sure.
Yeah, Hot to Trot was a real mess. So make sure to check out the Culture Cast on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and wherever you get your podcasts.
I know you know who I'm talking about. It's that guy.
Yeah, with the eyebrows, right?
He's in a million
the bushy
movies.
eyebrows.
Sometimes they're bushy, but he also sometimes have a mustache.
Yeah, but he's shaved. Well,
no, he did. You know who I'm talking about. You've seen him in a million movies. We just saw him in that one thing.
Yeah, he looks like a pug.
Listen to me, Chris Gore, and Anthony Ray Bench on the Film Threat Podcast.
You got questions. Sometimes we have the answers.
I'm Chris Cooling from Forgotten TV, and you're listening to The Projection Booth, the ultimate movie podcast.
From what I understand, you grew up over in the Philippines.
Actually, I didn't grow up in the Philippines. I was bored there, and I spent my first few years there. And then I lived in Nicaragua, Panama, and Puerto Rico until I went to high school in Atlanta, Georgia. And even though I was a movie fan, which was not so uncommon, and I was a kind of an EC Comics, Mad Magazine, horror movie kind of kid, and I fooled around with the Super 8 camera in high school and stuff like that. I never really, considered that you could, make a living making movies until I was about, I think I was pushing 30, and that was when video recorders were starting to kind of just invented, really. I ended up with a Bolek 16 millimeter camera. It was one of the cameras that all the TV news outfits were dumping because they were all going to video. They didn't have to. They were all starting to shoot on 3/4 inch video, and because they didn't have to use the lab then for their film. And so they were dumping these cameras, and I ended up with one and started fooling around with it, and then thought I'd make a movie. And I found somebody who had studied film in school, and so I started, making a short, and that turned into a feature, kind of all amateur stuff. And this was in North Carolina. I kind of liked it so much that I started reading the magazines and trying to figure out how maybe I could make money doing that. And that basically led me to move to LA, because at that time you couldn't really do it. Everybody that wanted to make movies went to LA pretty much. That's how I ended up out here. And I was lucky enough to be able to make movies and kind of make a living at it somewhat.
Well, what was that first feature like? Was that a horror film?
Kind of. It was sort of an art, not really horror, because it had special effects. It was called Self-Portrait in Brains, about an artist who puts dynamite in his mouth and blows his head against the canvas as a piece of art, and kind of it comes back as a hologram. It's a revenge type thing. I mean, it wasn't any good. I didn't know it wasn't any good until I showed it to my friends, because when you make something, you always think it's wonderful. And then after I did that, I thought, gee, I should do this, but professionally, with people who are professionals. And so I put a ad in Variety, a little 1-inch ad that said, horror movie director wanted. And I got like hundreds of letters. In fact, then there wasn't even fax machines. Calling long distance was expensive, So then I went out to LA and started having meetings with the people that sent me the letters, and eventually met someone out there that kind of showed me around and took me to movie sets, and I started realizing that all the people from around the country that were like me all went to LA. And so it was just sort of like you were in this, kind of where you might be able to make movies. And that kind of got me into it.
Well, how did you start getting gigs? How'd you get involved with like Empire Pictures?
My friend took me to the Empire sets, and at first I was doing more financing type stuff. The first thing I did out here to make money is I went in with a guy two people who, one of them was a collector and one was he was a lawyer, but he was kind of a hustler, and we basically sold like hundreds of hours of public domain TV shows to the UHF stations. Once the TV went from, like when I was growing up, there'd be like 4 channels, and then it went up to like 13 channels. But then when they went above 13, I think that was UHF. And that was like, so there was like channel 55, you know what I mean? So everywhere had a channel, but a lot of them didn't have any money. And they were looking for the cheapest programming, and we found this, that we could package this public domain old 50s shows. They call it the golden years of television. That was sort of like how I first kind of kept going, paid my way. And then also when I met Empire, I really liked what Charlie, I met Albert Band, who was Charlie Band's father. And that was right when Charlie was starting Empire. And I had a project, which they basically fleeced me for. And I helped. Charlie was always in trouble with cash flow. So he was always desperate for money to pay the crew or something. But he also had a video distribution company, which anybody could do back then. It was very lucrative. He was always willing to discount contracts directly from the video chains, so the money wouldn't go through him. It would sign over to you, and he would give a big discount because he was always desperate. And so I was able to kind of get involved with doing some of that kind of financing for some of the early Empire movies. And then eventually I realized I was never going to get a movie made with Charlie, and he owed me money. So then I started developing Reanimator with Stuart Gordon. And in order to get the money back from Charlie, I produced it out of his offices and using the money he owed me to do the post, and let him do the foreign sales and distribute it in the U.S. too, which he was just starting Empire Distribution. And all that worked real well until he didn't pay the money, and I had to sue, and it was just this long nightmare of getting unentangled from him. But that's how I got into making movies. I borrowed the money from people I knew back east and some in California. So I got people to just risk money, and I made the movie and paid them back. And luckily, Reanimator was outstanding. Then the next 2 movies I did, Charlie paid for. So he paid for Dolls and From Beyond, both of which I produced. We made them in Italy. And it was during From Beyond that I had to sue him, and so then I quit doing business with him. I was working on Robot Jocks with Stuart, and then I quit because I was having to sue him for the monies that had been misappropriated from the revenues of Reanimate. The old Hollywood story, actually. So in answer to your question, the way I got a job was I just paid for it. I was the producer, so I was the boss. So the message is you can do any job you want if you pay for it. So if you finance a movie, you can do whatever you want. Luckily, at that point, I was smart enough not to try to write or direct it. I developed it. I paid Stuart Gordon and Dennis Paoli and William Norris already had a 50-page television script that they had written when I first met Stuart. And I agreed to option it and to develop it into a feature. And so over the period of a year, we went back and forth developing the feature and then shot it.
You worked with Stuart Gordon a lot. You also worked with Ed Naha a lot. How did you meet Ed?
Well, Ed, I met through Charlie Band because Charlie had a project from him. The first movie Charlie paid for, but my second movie as a producer was Dolls, and Charlie wanted to make a movie about dolls, and so Ed Naha was pitching stuff to Charlie, and so he pitched this Hansel and Gretel type thing, and he made that script. So that's how I knew Ed. And then when I think Stuart kept working with Charlie Band, all of them did. Stuart and the actors all kept working with Charlie when I separate. So I went my own way, and Stuart stayed working with Charlie, and he made a number of movies with Charlie that I wasn't at all involved in. And I think one of those was also written by Ed Naha, not just Dolls. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Castle Freak, might have been an Ed Naha script. I'm not sure. And I think that it was originally called Bloodless, but I may be wrong. I know there was a project called Bloodless, and I think that Ed Naha wrote it. And it took place in a castle and everything, but I think it might have been what turned into Castle Freak, the movie that Stuart directed in Italy with Barbara Crampton and Jeffrey Combs, and a freak. But I think, and then after that, when Stuart and I, actually, while we were doing From Beyond, we were still in post on Dolls, because we shot Dolls and From Beyond before we edited either of them. So we went to Italy. I think it was in the fall of '85. Then we shot Dolls before Christmas, and then after Christmas we shot From Beyond on the same set. Actually, we built one set and then adapted it between the movies. So on Dolls, it was a English kind of house in Dolls. And then From Beyond, it was supposed to be in Salem, Massachusetts. So we shot them both. It was a big sound stage. It was the Dino De Laurentiis studios right outside of Rome. And so we shot both of them there. But while we were shooting, right before we began shooting From Beyond, I guess, we came back to the States because we had come up with this idea for Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and we pitched it to Disney, and they went for it. And then we wrote the basic story, and then they wanted to do it, and so then we proposed Ed Naha to write it, and so Ed Naha came in and wrote on it, and then there was another writer too, finally. But anyway, that's the other way I knew Ed. I worked with him on Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And other than that, I think I only worked with him on those two things that got made, which was Dolls and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And I think, at one point or another, I had talked to him about projects, but none of them got made.
Now, you're listed as a producer on Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. How much of a role did you actually play in the production of that?
Well, on the development side, I was the producer. I developed the whole thing while Stuart was the director. And right like a week before we were going to shoot, Stuart had to leave the project due to health reasons. And then I was supplanted, basically, by the new director came in, who was Joe Johnston. And naturally, people bring in their own. But yeah, I developed the whole thing, developed the story, for 8 months, I was the producer of the movie.
How did you come to Society?
Well, after I left Charlie Band, I quit working with him. Then I needed to find another way to go. And with Reanimator, I had raised the money from people who weren't in the movie business. Of course, neither was I. And the movie was, I paid them all back, and with a guaranteed return. And even so, it wasn't it's not like I was on bad terms with anybody, but I could tell that, because the movie had a kind of notoriety, there was this feeling that they should have gotten rich off it. Well, of course, all the money was siphoned away by Empire and really by Vestron, who Empire was deeply in debt to. What they do is stuff like they would sell the movie with a package of 10 movies, say, or 20 movies, and then they would, basically people would have to buy all those other movies to get Reanimator, but then they would pay Reanimator 1/20th of the package. And then in Empire's case, they wouldn't pay the money to me anyway. I'd go to the markets and I'd talk to buyers, and they would say they paid so many hundreds of $1,000s to Charlie, but then it wouldn't be accounted to me. So all the money that came in on Reanimator, I didn't get. And that's why I had to take out a very expensive lawsuit and finally wrangle the picture back plus some money. But of course, the money was gone. So then that makes it very awkward. I mean, everybody, all the investors I guaranteed them a return on their money, and I paid it. But as far as getting rich, that wasn't going to happen. And I realized that I would prefer to work with companies that were in the business of movies and not with people who weren't, who might have naive or unrealistic ideas about what the business is like. And I think anybody who makes a movie and finances it from people not in the movie business will probably tell you this. If you talk to anybody like that, they'll probably, eventually, it's just so much better to deal with people who are companies to finance, because if the movie doesn't work or if there's a problem with it, you're dealing with people who know the business, who are protecting their own interests. Whereas if your father's friend is a dentist and he puts up some money, you have to feel like you have to protect him. Whereas if you go deal with a movie company, you don't have to protect them. You just protect yourself. Everybody knows what the score is. They know what the business is. And so right after Reanimator, I was really happy to do the movies with Charlie, because then I actually got a fee and didn't have any risk and didn't have to protect anybody. Of course, those movies don't really, all you get is your fee. That's the other part of it. It's fine as long as you're making new movies every year. You don't have an annuity. Nobody's paying, it's like, I'm sure you've heard a million times, the whole thing about getting net points. It just doesn't work. You don't get anything from profit participation. Except with Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, I did make a lot of money on because that movie was just so successful. If you pay for it yourself, then you stand to benefit if the movie works. And down the line, if the movie's good, you can still sell it later, years later. But if you make it as a job, even if you get profit points, you're basically just going to get your fee. And another way to go is you can, instead of profit points, you can get payments based on certain performance. So you don't have to try to worry about the obtuse accounting of movies for profits. I just wanted to deal with companies, with people who were in the business of movies, and not have to deal with people who were outside of it and didn't know the business. After I quit working on Robot Jocks, I started working with Dan O'Bannon on a script that he was going to direct called The Men, about a woman who discovers that all men are aliens. And I worked with Dan for kind of almost a year on it, I think. And then finally, when I got it financed, he bailed it. He didn't want to do it. And it was difficult. I mean, he was a odd person. Dan O'Bannon is a very creative person. He's the guy who, basically wrote Alien and, brought Giger into it. And he directed Return of the Living Dead, if you remember. He's really great. But he was also like a paranoid crazy. And so the idea that him bailing out at the last minute on the deal was right when we were going to sign all the deals. It was shock. It was like kind of a shock, but it also wasn't that. I mean, it was not something that anybody that ever worked with Dan would be too surprised at, if you know what I mean. It's not like it was like a steady Freddy, doing something way out of character. Dan was not a predictable guy. He was a very creative and unpredictable guy. But anyway, that project was had a great deal of paranoia to it. It was sort of a paranoia story about a woman. So I had already built this whole thing up in my mind because I helped scheme up the story with him. It was his original idea. And around that time, a friend of mine, Keith Wally, who had been a sales agent at Empire, had split off to make his own company that was being financed. He's a Brit, and it was being financed by another Brit who lived in Tokyo named Paul White. And at that time, in the early to mid 80s, Japan was like just money bags. They were killing it everywhere. And so he was able to finance a company called Wild Street Pictures, using Japanese company investments. And Keith Wally was going to run the company in LA. And I was friends with Keith. He stayed at my house while I went to Rome to make Gulls and From Beyond. So we were friends. And they were doing these really cheap movies, kind of the way, similar to what Charlie was doing when I first met him, except that Charlie was more experienced because Charlie's father was in the movie business. So Charlie grew up in the movie business. So I was really excited about that. And I was trying to get involved. I'd go to the sets of these little movies they were making and tried to help them, advise them and stuff. And then I made a deal with them that they could finance Bride of Reanimator, the Reanimator sequel. At that time, I wanted to direct. So I always had heard that, I thought that it would be very dangerous that if the movie didn't work. A French distributor once told me that in France, they would always say that a first-time director was usually making two movies in one, his first and his last. Because that's kind of the way it is. Most people get one shot, And so I thought, wow, I have no training. I've never taken a film class in my life. All I've done is produce and read books. And so I thought, well, if I'm not any good, if I fumble out of the gate, I want a second chance. I don't want it to be an all or nothing. So I told him, I'll let you guys finance the Reanimator sequel, which had real value. But I wanted to produce and direct it and write it, and I want to do two movies, and I want that one to be the second one. So I made a deal that I would direct a movie and then I would direct Bride of Reanimator. So that way I figured even if the first movie failed, I still got another chance. So that was a very kind of a risk-adverse sort of way to go into it. And a guy gave me a script. I mean, this was still while I was still working. I forget. I think I was still working over it. I think I was still just in the ends of dealing with robot jocks. I forget. But anyway, this guy, Rick Fry, kind of chased me down and gave me a script called Society that he had written with Woody Keith. It was really paranoid, and I was just coming off of the Dan O'Bannon thing, and where I was totally involved for months in this whole paranoia kind of the men thing. And so I already had that. I was already into that paranoia thing. And that's what this script did from the get-go. It's this weird paranoia thing of this guy who thinks his parents are up to something. And it's all very twisted. And I really liked it. But it didn't have at the end, it ended up being a blood cult, which I wanted something with special effects. I just thought, man, if this is going to be my movie, I want something weirder than a blood cult. Kids getting killed, you know. I was always really into effects. So I loved, at that time, like Nightmare on Elm Street or the Howling, those kind of effects. So I thought, I imagined what I'd like to see that I hadn't seen. I imagined like the flesh melding together. And so I started developing that idea. At the same time, the Japanese asked that I meet Screaming Mad George, who was in LA making special effects. He had done a big sequence for one of the Nightmare on Elm Streets, the Roach Motel, I think. And they asked if I'd meet him and maybe he could do some of the effects because he's Japanese and kind of they knew about him or knew him. And so I went to meet him, and he was this incredibly original surrealist artist, sculptor. And I studied art when I was in North Carolina and was a painter at one time. And I loved surrealism, and he was crazy for it. And we just went to his house and started watching, Andalusian Dog and looking through Dali books and started developing the images for society. And then I would go and I'd sit with Woody Keith and Rick Fry late into the nights, and we would come up with, we kind of adapted the script so that the ending wasn't a blood cult, but it was the shunting. And so we came up with the shunting, and meanwhile, I was working with George to come up with the images of it. And so we'd get the images and go back to the script. And we picked mostly we picked images from Dali paintings for the sculpture of the shunting, and also using just stuff George came up with, And I tried to engineer it into the story so it had a kind of a coherence. And that's how it all sort of came together. It was financed by the Japanese through Paul White into his company in LA called Wild Street. And so that's how I got into that.
Why the shunting? I've always been curious about that.
If I'm not mistaken, I think Woody Keith came up with that term. He was a really, really crazy guy. That script is kind of a weird, kind of a alternate reality autobiographical story for him. Woody Keith grew up in Beverly Hills with a very wealthy family, and that he thought was, and he's a little unbalanced, and he's very creative, and he thought he always imagined the worst, that there was this weird secret world going on. And he has a very kind of twisted sense of irony that I also have. I mean, I love stuff that's ironic and satirical and layers of sort of alternate meanings and stuff. And so we just had a great time working with the script. And I think when we started talking about it, I couldn't say for sure who came up with that term, but I'm going to guess it was Woody. It just seemed to fit as a shunt. I mean, there's something dirty about that term. Shunting really means, in medical terms, I think it means like you kind of, if you shunt a vein, you kind of stick something in it to take it in another tube, But it had nothing to do with that. There's just something about the sound of it that seemed right. My mythology for the shunt is that this other species that has, in my mind, it all started like, let's say, the beginning of Space Odyssey, except instead of a monolith, that some nasty parasite crawled out of the ground and infected some of the cavemen, and the ones that infected, it's a parasite. Sort of takes over the body, and they find that they can dominate the rest of the group, and then they intermarry, and they're the ones that exploit everybody in every society in every part of history. But because of the intermarriages, they become kind of almost literal blue bloods. Of course, the fun here is that we make it a sci-fi thing, right? It's real. It they're more than a different species. They're a different class. So it's all very satirical. It's all very kind of funny and fun. It's kind of just sort of having fun with ideas that aren't particularly insightful, but giving them, playing them out in a untwisted, disgusting kind of way, I'm not sure that you could, at the time, it was hard to call Society a horror movie because that doesn't quite fit my definition of horror, and I'm a big horror fan because, it wasn't really like horror. It kind of goes into sci-fi. It's kind of almost, I think Screaming Mad George and I used to call it psychofiction. It's like when you take your paranoia and make it real. You just give reality, sort of like expressionism. That it's more about, what you see is how you should feel, or the form you give something is kind of your interpretation of the story. Not, it's more like having a good time with the material. But it was, it was definitely a collaborative effort. Certainly, I would say, Woody Keith and Rick Fry and Screaming Mad George and myself. It's kind of three witches at the brew.
Well, what was that experience like for you to be sitting in that director's chair and be making your first film?
Oh, I loved it. Almost anybody that works on a movie set, I think at one time or another, you look at the director and you kind of go, I'd like to do that. Because the director gets to make all these arbitrary choices, and everybody listens to him, and everything he does seems so important. If you go to the restroom, somebody's running along with you with the radio, telling everybody, you can make all these arbitrary decisions. They're showing you props and colors for the set. And you're picking locations and actors, and you're setting up the shots. And so everything, you have all these people doing what you ask for. Anybody who's worked on a set generally feel like, gee, I'd like to try that. It can be easy to lose confidence. So some people can't just get bogged down. The pressure on the director is huge. And so you're one of the few people who can't just leave it on the set, go home and rest. And when things aren't going well, which means you're not getting your day, not making your day, the pressure is really great. And there's so many variables that how you get it all to work together. Often it's not within your power, but you are expected to have it within your power. And so it can be really, really a miserable experience. And on most movies, about halfway through, you're just at a point where you just can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. But on Society, as my first movie, I never felt like that. I just felt total enthusiasm and like this was the greatest thing in the world. I just had a ton of fun. I mean, it was just wonderful. Plus, even while we were shooting Society, setting up for the shunt, the Dodgers, were winning the World Series. So I was on the radio. It was like the best of all worlds.
Billy Warlock was in almost every scene in the film. How was he like to work with?
Well, Billy is great. I saw him a few years ago. The movie was not well received at all, not in the U.S. It really dumped on. It got terrible reviews in the U.S. But in England, it was quite not a big hit, but it was a regular hit there and very well received. And it was also well received in like France and Spain and Italy. But back then there was no internet. So you didn't really know what was going on. Somebody could tell you something. Billy told me he went to England to do, I forget for what. And when he got out into the airport, there was photographers and reporters because of the fact. He was like shocked. Because here, even my friends kind of didn't like it, I thought it was going to be number one at the box office. But then again, I was delusional. I just thought it was so great that, but it's hard to accept that it's hard for me to accept that my taste is not the mainstream taste. That what I think is really great, most people don't like. You know, it's you're really lucky to have the taste of Steven Spielberg, for example. You know, where what he likes, we all like. You know, which is great. But if you're like me, what I like, it's a very marginal. I have a marginal kind of audience. Even within genre back then, society wasn't very well accepted. But what was really interesting was that almost 20 years later, it started becoming rediscovered. And now it's like better, it's more popular right now than it was ever before. You know, I own the movie, so I do, you know, people contact me for screenings all the time from all around the world. And wow, it's like at least a couple times a month I get people who want to screen it. And that's amazing because the movie is like 30 years old. Yeah, 30 years old this year. That's incredible. You know, first time I ever saw, when I was kind of a teenager, 30 years ago, was silent movies. You know, that's how weird it is. 30 years is a long time. So that's pretty amazing, and that's really gratifying. I think I know kind of why it's working, but it definitely has become, like you asked me about it, right? Maybe 20 years ago, you wouldn't ask me about it. You would ask me about something else. And Billy Warlock, when I saw him recently, like a few years ago, because I never saw him much. I don't think I worked with him, and then we had a rap party, and I don't know that I ever saw him again. And he told me that, he said, you know, it's only been recently that, he said, when we were making that movie, I had no idea what we were doing. And I realized that probably almost none of the actors did, but I do know that Evan Richards did. Evan Richards played Milo. He's done some pretty good movies, and he was living in England because I saw him a couple times when I would be at the airport flying through London or something, and he'd be on the same plane or something. And Evan was so enthusiastic about it. He was just so, you know, every time over the years, I've seen him every few years or something accidentally. And I think he was totally got it, but I don't think I don't think he did until many years later when it started having this renewed interest by a kind of younger generation.
Well, why do you think that is? Why do you think it does have this long-standing popularity, and why has it gotten so much more popular recently?
When it was released here, I don't think the poster ever. They used the same poster from England, and it kind of looked like an art movie. I think that put people off, and the key art. So when the Arrow Blu-ray collector's edition came out, they did new art, which made you look at it as a horror fan. You go, I got to see it. I've heard of it. I've got to see it. There's a lot of movies people have heard of that they haven't seen and talk about them, but they actually haven't seen them. Then the other thing was that I think the whole, you know, the movie was kind of having fun with kind of this sort of political thing and like class exploitation. And it was made during the Reagan era. It was kind of a response to that. Well, at that time, that was the time of greed is good. And people, I don't think it was really a message. It wasn't kind of a context that was very comfortable. Whereas when it started getting popular again was sort of when the Great Recession happened, when all of a sudden the economy collapsed and people started looking at the 1% and stuff, and then they thought, oh, this movie is kind of like that. And whereas in England, they've always been, you know, beating the class thing to death. And so I think they loved that, having fun with that idea, you know, the idea that they're rich people are different. The other thing is that I think the first-time director awkwardness of the movie with some of the acting and stuff, I think that back then maybe was seen for what it was, and now when people look at it, they don't forgive it. They just don't understand it. They think, oh, that's the 80s, because there's goofy stuff about the 80s. And so they, just like when we watch a an old Japanese, we watched a J-horror, The Ring or something, the Japanese version. And we watched these Japanese horror movies, these ghost movies, with the girl with the hair hanging in front of her eye, coming down the hall or something. And, we love them for how weird and scary they are. And then, but if you point out that, wow, that's really illogical, why would she do that? Then the response will be, oh, that's the Japanese culture, And it really isn't the Japanese culture. It is that it's just illogical. but we forgive it for that. And I think that with society, now there's this appreciation for all things 80s, VHS, the goofy clothes and all that kind of stuff. So that style of 80s, society was done in the context of a high school comedy almost, right? The look of the kid, except for when it gets dark, it's like the kid at school and the girlfriend and it was like any one of these high school comedy things. And now I think when people look at it, they think, oh, that's the 80s. So they appreciate it in a way that maybe is very forgiving. And then I think ultimately the shunting and the concept of it, and especially the shunting, those effects were never done again. So the movie it's not a seminal movie in any way. It's a movie that sort of stands alone. And so I was just, for example, watching American Werewolf in London the other day, see how it holds up. And, that movie won the first makeup effects Oscar. And it's, it's basically, it's appliances, gore appliances. And you look at it and you go, wow, that was new back then. It was really different back then. But everybody did it again and again, and even better. It got, you end up with The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, all the Nightmare on Elm Street, and everybody was doing these kind of weird gore puppet effects, and they were done a lot. And so, it's like looking at Halloween. If you look at Halloween, it's hard to imagine how original that movie was when it came out. When it came out, it was like super original. But after you've had Halloween, Nightmare and Friday the 13th, and Happy Birthday, and Prom Night, you have all these slasher movies based on Halloween. Halloween doesn't seem so special anymore. Whereas with society, nobody ever did those kinds of effects again, and never will now because it's all digital now. So it's just like nobody's ever going to make stop motion like Harryhausen again. You'll forever be the best because it's never going to be necessary. There's going to be better ways to do it. And with the effects of Springing George's effects in the movie, there's a sense of it. We haven't seen that again. And so it's really an eye opener. And also just what happens in it is kind of outrageous and strong. And that's a function of the fact that I was dealing with the financing of it, didn't put any requirements on the movie. The movies are a reflection of their financing. So if a studio, for example, had made it would have been watered down a lot, whereas the money came from Japan. Paul White was the guy who got the money, and he just sent it over to Woody Key, and nobody was around to say, no, you can't do this. I did whatever I wanted. Generally, that's been the case. I've had that experience a number of times, but it depends more on what the company is, who's paying for it and what they expect. And I think that was, for example, when you talk about Reanimator and people say it's so outrageous and everything. Well, I was the guy paying for it ultimately, and I wanted it to be outrageous. And I didn't have to go to anybody to see if I could do something crazy. I could just do it. And I know that with society, when I was doing the shunning, I just thought I was king of the world. was thinking, wow, I get to do this. And I could do whatever I wanted. I didn't have to show it to anybody and have them say, oh, no, I think you shouldn't do this. You should go this way. The main thing that Keith Wally, the producer, wanted is when we were going through the script, he said, man, I think you need a 1-to-1 fight in this thing. You need a duel at the end. And so we made a duel between Billy and the bad guy. Well, he was absolutely right. But, it's not like he said you have to, and nor did he say how to do it. He was just kind of throwing in on the process. But it wasn't like there was somebody, there was a studio saying, hey, you can't put this incest stuff in there. Or you can't have these kinds of, you've got to pull back on it. Nobody did that. And so society has that freewheeling kind of feeling to it that today I think people are surprised by.
What are you working on these days?
I've been trying to get involved with a lot of these small movies with these kind of emerging directors around town. I sometimes I have a partner, and we'll sometimes be like producers, reps on small movies.
You've done so many amazing films. Return of the Living Dead Part 3 is one of my favorites that I don't think nearly enough people have seen.
Yeah, that one is, it's a little bit like Society, except that it's not kind of so weird and different like Society, It's like pretty mainstream type of zombie movie. But it is a movie that just never gets its due because it really is good. It's really good. But I think one of the problems with that movie is that it doesn't have a title. So once it's really complicated. It's not like it's kind of Return of the Living Dead already as a sequel title because it's The Living Dead. So when you do Return of the Living Dead, you're already in the sequel. Then to give it a Part 3, then you can't give it a subtitle. It just does. And the thing that it was all based on that whole deal was based on the title. When Trimark was the company that financed it, and produced it, or financed it, and then I produced it for them. They asked if I would do. We didn't have a script. They asked if I would make the movie, and I said sure, because I liked both, kind of like the Night of the Living Dead stuff, and I love the Dan O'Bannon EC Comics Return of the Living Dead. So those are two great things to be. I love those franchises. Or I don't know that Return of the Living Dead wasn't a franchise because the second one didn't really work. But but we started by interviewing writers, and I went into it just with the idea that I wanted a main character to be Living Dead. I wanted the main character to be, and part of that was because after doing Bride of Reanimator, I realized that the bride was the best character in it, and she was only on screen for like 15 minutes or something, 20 minutes. And I thought, God, what a shame, And I thought next time I want that kind of character to be the movie. And so that was and plus I thought that even back then, imagine 1990, 91, it seemed like there had just been too many zombie movies. So what can you do that hasn't been done? Of course, now imagine. And so that was another reason to say, well, make the zombie be the main character. Don't just turn the point of view around. And so that was my approach. And then I got pitches from a lot of different writers, and the one I liked was John Penny, and Trimark agreed. Trimark had to approve everything in that case, and And John is actually my partner now in these producers reps deals and stuff. And so he was great because he already had this idea of a kind of a Romeo and Juliet type story built into a military use of the living dead as soldiers. And God, it was just a real, from his pitch and developed his script from there. And, it's probably the movie that I've made, or certainly that I've directed, that ended up the most like what was planned from the beginning. There was very little about that movie that was like, let's see what happens, Like they say, most movies are like a discovery. You discover what the movie is as you go along. Well, with Return of the Living Dead 3, I think I had just about every scene in the movie all storyboarded. The storyboards were adapted to the set, to the locations once we found them. I think there's only one scene that I purposely didn't storyboard, which was the scene in the convenience store. And I wanted that one to be kind of improvised at the location. And I think it worked out real well. And I think the very end was a little sloppy when all the hell broke loose. But in general, we never went over. We never had a problem with doing things within the time. It was really a well-run production, and I thought it really worked well. I thought, Mindy Clark was so good in it as the Julie, as the zombie, and all the different secondary characters were great. So that movie, I thought, really has a lot of heart. Has a lot of heart by the end of it, and I think it's one of the better zombie movies. One of the top 10,
That's another one where just the makeup effects on Melinda Clark are so great.
Yeah, that was Steve Johnson. We had like 5 or 6 different makeup effects teams on that movie. And, which has always been, it kind of was the philosophy I kind of early on developed about effects, which kind of runs counter to what most low-budget filmmakers that have to use effects think. Usually there's this idea that you should take what little money you have and give it all to one company so it'll amount to something, so it'll seem like more, and have them do everything because they feel like you can't just, if you divide it up, it's going to get too small. But I've always thought that different companies and different effects artists have different strengths. And you don't want to get Screaming Mad George to do gore effects, for example. That's not his strength, He needs to do weird stuff. And then some people so everybody has different types of stuff they can do. And I usually have an effects coordinator or supervisor. And on this case, I had a guy named Tom Renoni, and he was really into it. And he was the one that would interface with all the effects guys. And what we did is we broke the effects out into certain groups of effects that fit together. So, and then find the adequate person to do it. And some effects you can get, there's no reason to hire a big-time artist or a big-time company because it's not that difficult in effect. And they're not going to be very challenged by it. But if you get some young guy that's never gotten a credit before or is just trying to get his company going, well, they will put their all into it because they need to showcase their work. And this is a big chance for it. So they will go way overboard, and the cost is not going to be the determining factor. Whereas if you go to a big company like K&B or something. Well, they do there's nothing you're going to give them that's going to be a big challenge. They're like the industry standard type of thing. But Tom Ranoni, even, the Riverman in his metal cage exoskeleton, Ranoni got this guy that didn't really do effects. He was like a welder. So he made real steel frame. It was because it was cutting into poor, I forget the name of the actor now, but Riverman was suffering. And, because it would cut into him. So normally the way you would do that is you would carve the pieces and then make a mold, and then pour the mold with foam latex or hard latex, and then, take it out and sand it down and paint it to look like steel, But it all ends up looking the same when you do that. But that's what most effects companies know how to do back in the 80s. And so by actually getting this guy to make this iron exoskeleton, wow, it really changed the whole dynamic for the actor. He couldn't, he had to really take it seriously. And so that's a choice that wouldn't have been typical. And then with somebody like Julie, I knew that I needed like a top makeup effects artist for that. It couldn't be like a new company or a young guy. It had to be somebody that was really an excellent makeup person. And so on that one, we got Steve Johnson to do her. And Steve Johnson is a really big-time effects guy, hugely successful. And so he's the one that did her. And once we designed her, he's the one that painted her, that made her applications and painted her. So it always looked really good, And then some of the effects we even did on the fly. The art department just did them when I'd just come up with something, for the next day, and everybody's budget was already out. I'd figure, hey, the art department's still on it, and they want to show their stuff. So it was I think the effects really worked in that movie, and they're fun. I tried to make the effects. I tried really hard on that movie to make the mythology of it fit the Romero and the Dan O'Bannon versions, because if you remember. Well, with the original Romero, it wasn't like an infection. It wasn't like if you got bit, you turned into a zombie. That's what we came to believe by the proximity of it. But actually, in the Dan O'Bannon version, when you die, you would come back. And remember, in Dawn of the Dead, the poster tagline was, "When hell is full, the dead will walk the earth." But that idea has, the idea of zombies, kind of the adaptation of the kind of, Caribbean zombies to the modern world, which I think which really hit the big turning point was Romero's Night of the Living Dead, was that there was this idea that these were soulless, walking flesh, and the idea, the explanation that when hell is full, the dead will walk the earth is a totally different idea from what really kind of caught fire with 28 Days Later, which was that it's an infection. And that's what it's become. Now zombie movies or Walking Dead movies, they're all about fear of like a plague, fear of other people. I think one of the best examples of this is if you look at the Evil Dead and then look at the neo version of it from the 2000s called Cabin Fever. The Evil Dead, it was like a demon possessing people. Kids go get the cabin in the woods, and find them, and then this demon possesses them, and it's just, it's supernatural kind of killings. Well, when the Cabin Fever was made, it was teenagers renting the cabin, but this time the cabin was a nice lodge on the lake that you actually imagine wanting to vacation at. Whereas all the cabins in the woods from like Evil Dead and stuff like that, you could never imagine. It's like, oh, let's go stay in that crappy cabin, that's terrible. But with Cabin Fever now, it's sort of the same as Evil Dead, except that it's just a sickness. They're afraid of the people because the people are sick and they're going to catch it. And I think that's more the modern fear, and the, Dawn of the Dead and Evil Dead and things like that. It was just kind of more supernatural. It was more threatening. And it wasn't just like, oh, I've got AIDS or I'm sick and now you're going to be sick. And wow, we better kill him because he's sick. And I think that's more the kind of, that has more to do with the fears that we have today than, back in the 60s and 70s. It was a little more, it was a different type of, it was more supernatural type of genre, I think. But so George Romero's was that if you shot it in the head and you kill the brainstem, the thing will just can't move, right? Biological. Whereas with Dan O'Bannon, I think Return of the Living Dead was the first movie to actually capture the look and the tone and the humor and the horror of the old EC comics, which I used to actually buy when I was a kid in the 50s. And if you've ever read the EC comics, there's always somebody eating a brain, or there's always revenge. There's always sex, and it's always really gory, but in kind of a technicolor kind of way. And it's fun and ironic and horrific, But we know that Creepshow was trying to do a EC Comics type of comic book horror, but it was always a little bit too clean and simple. It was always it didn't really capture the spirit of it. But with Return of the Living Dead, wow, that was it. It was just, Dan O'Bannon knew that you eat brains. Shooting somebody in the head doesn't matter. Their hands kind of crawl around, So that's totally different from the Romero. Plus, in the O'Bannon version, if you bite somebody, they get infected and they will change. Because remember, those guys are changing through the third act of the movie, getting sicker and sicker. And so there's really two different mythologies, two different styles. And quite frankly, when I was going to make Return of the Living Dead 3, usually sometimes I'm really focused on making a sequel. I've done a lot of sequels, focused on making a sequel really kind of fit the originals, so with Reanimator, I'm really critical about the mythology of it and making sure it makes sense within it. Whereas with Return of the Living Dead 3, I'm not sure why, but maybe it was because the second Return of the Living Dead didn't, they tried to make it funny like the first one with the same characters, and it just sort of went flat, and it didn't work. So that really at that point, the franchise didn't have much value, and I was excited to try to make it kind of bridge the gap or dovetail with the Romero version, basically, Dawn of the Dead. And when I asked Trimark what the requirements for the movie were before we developed the script, I asked if it had to be funny. They said no. And I said, does it have to have any of the same characters? No. Have any of the same actors? No. well, what does it? What do you require? What are the requirements? And they said, well, it has to have the trioxin gas and there has to be brain eating. That's the two things. So I didn't, usually I try to make things ironic and kind of funny, but in this, it wasn't funny and it wasn't even really ironic, although there was some funny bits, with the overdone, there's some overdone effects, like the guy with his spine holding his head up. That's kind of that's a funny effect, and it fits the Dan O'Bannon thing. You know what I mean? That was sort of that, Dan O'Bannon had the tar man, it was fun, and then he had the really horrific stuff like the dead woman on the table, saying that it hurt. So I tried to make the mythology fit both of those movies, and have the eye-popping kind of EC Comics kind of visuals that Dan O'Bannon had. But I thought that, and then John Penny kind of brought this whole kind of emotional love story to it. So it ended up being it was like the horror movie with a really kind of heartfelt love story at the middle of it.
Thank you so much again for your time. I really appreciate this.
Okie doke. Well, let me know if I can help you any further.
Good boy would get a sweet thing on the side. Home cooking, homicide. Side order could be a daughter. Finger licking good. Come on, baby, eat the rich. But the bite of the son of a bitch. Don't listen, don't you give me no switch. Come on, baby, and eat the rich. Come on, baby, and eat the rich.
All right, we were back and we were talking about Society. So yeah, I was reminded of quite a few other movies while I was watching this. And the other one that I didn't mention before was Rosemary's Baby. And that whole idea of like the coven and the secrecy, and just like Rosemary seems to be the only one who's not in on it. There have been great conspiracy type films before, but I've never seen a conspiracy as widespread as the one in Society, because almost everybody is in on it. Like, it's just like, what, three characters, I think, in this entire film that don't seem to be in on it, and everybody else, I guess some of the kids in the auditorium, but every other major character that we meet, even the cops, are all part of this cabal.
Yeah, it's almost like there's a few people left and they're just basically the food.
Yeah, Rosemary's Baby's I didn't really think of that as far as a comparison, but the fact that it very slowly builds, the paranoia builds, and then it all, comes to a head in Rosemary's Baby. It's when she goes into the apartment and the crib is there and they're all worshiping Satan. Not quite as visceral as the Shantine, but kind of a similar build up and as far as that level of paranoia goes.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's totally unrelated to the movie, but it just it's one of those kind of rich people being weird movies. Came out the same year as this one. Scenes from the class struggle in Beverly Hills, Paul Bartel's movie, with Jacqueline Bisset and Ed Begley Jr. and Wallace Shawn and Paul Mazursky. It kind of had a little bit of the same feel that rich people are weird, and like like Society, it's a funny movie.
They do make such a point in Society, like he starts calling them aliens, and they're just like, no, we're not aliens. And he still keeps calling them aliens anyway. And he's just, no, really, we're not aliens. And that they reveal that they've been part of, mankind basically from the beginning. And they make a reference too when they're talking about Turd Ferguson that he comes, like his lineage goes all the way back to the time of Julius Caesar. So it's like, wow, okay, these guys have been with us for a long, long time, and they just feed off of the poor however often they feel the need. And they are all of these people that are in power. They are the upper crust of our society. So yeah, this is a perfect movie in the time of Trump, where we just, I heard some statistic the other day that it was like 1% of the population in the U.S. controls 36% of the wealth of the entire nation. It's just like, wow, that's some pretty good numbers. I think that was the day that they announced that Jeff Bezos is now the richest person since they've been measuring rich persons. Like ever since they've kind of figured out how much people could make and all this, that he's now at the top of the list.
Well, another movie that society has always reminded me of is They Live, which, came out, I think right around, was it the same year, 89? And that's another movie that's very sort of came out in an era that was very politically divisive. And, it's that movie as well is about the secret society of, the rich kind of feeding off the poor.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see whether we get more movies like that in the current era as well, whether it's going to be permitted by, say, larger studios to make a political satire kind of movie, or whether that's going to be too divisive and so people back away from it because of the social media backlash.
They're too busy making superhero movies. That's all that gets made now. There's no room for political satire.
We need a good left-wing superhero.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a reaction to the Reagan 80s, moving into the George Bush early part of the 90s. American Psycho, the book, would come out 2 years after this. And I want to say that this movie, it was made in 89, but then didn't really get released, or as some people would say, it escaped in 92. So there was that period of time, but I think it probably should have played as well in 92 as it did in 89. Luckily, it wasn't a huge gap, just because we were still in like the George Bush era of this. George Bush the first, that is, I should say.
Yeah, it is in a sense, it is a very political movie, even though it's all we remember as a shunting. There is a kind of edge to it that a lot of movies of the time, particularly horror movies, kind of veered away from. They were kind of apolitical to a big extent, but this one definitely is about class warfare.
Yeah, George Romero was doing political horror kind of around this time, and it makes me think of, although I don't think it's a particularly good movie, I would compare it also to Land of the Dead, which he did obviously, a couple decades later, but that's another one where the satire is not particularly subtle. I don't think it works as well as it does in Society, just because it's on the nose, but it's not. That's all it is. It's not entertaining as like a movie on its own. But similar kind of class warfare going on.
Yeah, my head actually hurt after Land of the Dead because he just beat me about the head and neck and shoulders.
But I don't know. Did you get what it was about? Did you get it?
Subtle as a Robert Redford film.
When Dennis Hopper said we don't negotiate with terrorists, did you get it? R.I.P. George Romero.
And Dennis Hopper, yeah.
It was kind of like in, I think it was the third Star Wars movie, you're either with us or against us. I was like, oh, okay, yeah. I've heard that somewhere before, okay.
Was that, oh yeah, you're talking about the prequels, yeah.
Sorry, I should have said number 3 as opposed to number 6.
Episode 3.
That numbering system just drives me nuts.
I did mention The Thing earlier, and even mentioned Invasion of the Body Snatchers. This kind of reminds me more of the 78 Body Snatchers than the 56 one. I guess it's that squelching noise that we hear on the tape, and then we hear it again later on. It almost has like insect overtones to it, in the way that they use those insect noises, especially in The Thing, so effectively. It's a natural noise, like the noise of a cicada, but it puts you on edge, and that it fits with otherworldliness, and the squelching noises that we hear on the tape and then in person. We talk about the visuals of this film so much, but the sound design is actually very nicely done to give us the heebie-jeebies.
What that reminded me of, and I watched this recently for my podcast, is the original version of The Fly, where he's got the thing over his head and he's drinking the sugar-laced milk underneath the hood. And you've got that slurping, squelching noise there, and it's incredibly effective then. And it kind of reminded me of that a bit.
Yeah, I noticed also the scene where Bill is in bed with Clarissa and he falls out of bed and we see her with the backwards legs or whatever. There's insect noises playing over that, even though it doesn't seem to be motivated by anything, but it's there and it just sort of adds that extra level of kind of creepiness to it.
And Jay, you mentioned parents, and I could totally see that while I was watching this too. That whole idea of we don't know who our parents are, who are these people, how weird are they, and that they end up being, cannibals. And the one movie makes total sense. And then this, it's like that whole idea of like, oh, I was adopted, I don't know who my parents are, blah, blah, blah. And then that is literally the truth in this is, yeah, you were adopted, and we basically adopted you so that we can consume your body after 18 years. Fantastic.
Yeah, in both movies, it's like that paranoia, you feel like an outsider in your own house. Like you don't even have that sense of comfort. And I saw Parents before I saw Society, again, when I was 10 or 11 years old. So I don't think I realized how funny Parents was until years later, because the first time I saw it, it really disturbed me.
Yeah, and that taps really into kind of the insecurity that a lot of kids have as teenagers in that, they don't fit in anywhere. And so... or even younger. And so people wonder, everybody I suppose has wondered whether they were adopted at some stage. I mean, in my case, I hoped I was. But every kid has that insecurity about who they are and where they come from and whether they're going to live up to the expectations put upon them. And putting it into the movie kind of gives it just that little bit of a lift. Though, of course, the movie is about the shunt.
Yeah, and there's that line, I think it was Rousseau or somebody who said, like when there's nothing else to eat, the poor will eat the rich. But this film totally reminds me of more of a Jonathan Swift type thing with a Modest Proposal, where it's just like, oh, well, I know how to solve the problems. Why don't we just have the poor people sell us their children so we can eat them? Because that is very much, what this movie is playing upon, is that whole idea of like, yeah, the poor are just there. They are just cattle for us to eat and to enjoy, and we will, live off the fat of the land. And the whole thing with the judge with this big fat cigar and all this kind of stuff. I'm surprised that more characters weren't more corpulent in this film. It feels like it would have, like, there's that idea of, being young and beautiful and pretty, which a lot of these characters are. But then as they get older, kind of looking more like the, the guy who runs Bullet Town, or the guy that runs, what is it, like Wartown or whatever in the Mad Max Fury Road, like that guy with the huge elephantine legs and stuff, just feels like a Baron Harkonnen type of a character, where it's just like, I am so fat I don't have to move and I can just do anything that I want. And I guess that kind of reminds me, going back to the Trump comparisons, it's just like, oh, I put a suspender belt on him and he's off, floating around and laughing like a madman.
In some ways, Trump's an anomaly, because in our societies, being fat is not a sign of wealth, it's a sign of poverty. So we've got to kind of turn around from the traditional, all through history. The rich people were fat, Henry VIII and people like that. But in our societies, because the quality of food is so much less for poor people are fat, and rich people on the whole, with Trump as the exception, are thin. I went too deep there. Sorry, guys.
Kim Jong-un, he could lose a little bit of weight. I worry about his health sometimes.
He's the only person eating in that country, yeah.
All right, we're going to take another break and play a preview for next week's show.
When you've got nothing and you want everything, you've got to get to be the Mac.
I mean, being rich and black means something, man. Don't you know that?
The Mac. His business is pleasure. He sells the soft stuff.
They're going to have to rewrite the Mac and Game book, baby, because I'm going to be the new king.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the big moment we've all been waiting for. The Mac of the Year. Goldie! 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 Brothers gonna work it out. Brothers gonna work it out. Brothers gonna work it out.
Max Julian is Goldie, and Goldie is the Mac. The Mac.
Richard Pryor, and music by Willie Hutch. The Mac, from Cinerama Releasing, rated R. Under 17, not admitted without parent. Now that you've seen all the rest, make way for the Mac, the biggest and the best.
Cause each man demands respect, and they get an equal share.
That's right, we'll be back next week with the discussion of The Mac. Can you dig it? Until then, I want to thank this week's co-hosts, Terry and Jay. Terry, what is the latest with you these days, sir?
I'm still doing Paleo Cinema podcast, and I'm also doing the Martian Drive-In podcast, and I'm playing them as a one-man band as I usually do, and they're going nicely. I've got some ideas. We're going to Japan next year, so I may do a whole bunch of Kurosawa movies in the future and kind of have a look at those and just kind of get in the vibe for it.
And what's the best place for people to find your stuff?
Basically, if you search Paleo Cinema with a dash, Paleo-Cinema, anywhere you'll find the podcast.
And Jay, how is the world of Red Letter Media?
Oh, it's good. It's busy. It's summer, so it's actually been a shockingly bad summer for movies. That's usually when we do a lot of our half in the bags, but we didn't see Deadpool 2 because I'm sure it's fine. We didn't see Ant-Man because I'm sure it's fine, but we're always working on stuff. So,
did you see Rampage?
No, I haven't seen Rampage. I can't. Every movie with The Rock looks the same to me now. It's always like him in a jungle, or him jumping from a burning building. I can't distinguish any of them anymore.
Good point.
But I'm sure they're all fine.
He's got something like 10 projects coming up in the near future. It's crazy. He's oversaturated the market. 7 of them are him in the jungle.
Except he still won't do like the Doc Savage project. I don't get that.
That would be one I'd pay to see. Yeah, if they did it as a period piece, I think it'll work fantastically well. And Shane Black was attached to do the script. That would have been fantastic.
Jay, is there a sequel to Space Cop coming anytime soon?
Oh God, no. But no, we're always working on stuff. So we'll we have more things coming that we haven't announced yet.
Well, thank you guys for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. Please head on over to the website projection-booth.com where you can find out more about today's episode. You'll also find links over to iTunes where you can rate and review the show, and to Patreon where you can make a donation to the show. Donors get early access to every episode as long as I'm not running late. Every donation and every rating we get helps the projection booth and society take over the world.
If you enjoy this show and want more people to know about it, head on over to iTunes, leave a comment, and rate it 5 stars. Make sure you like and share us on Facebook, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Just search for Christopher Media. Thank you in advance for supporting Christopher Media by clicking on the PayPal button and by clicking through to all the sponsors who support ChristopherMedia.net. Most importantly, we would like to take the time to extend an extra special thanks to you. Christopher Media could not exist without your support. Thank you for visiting ChristopherMedia.net, and thank you for listening. Christopher Media. Let's make some noise.